Hi, my name is Oscar. I'm recording this because maybe it can help somebody. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's just for me. I don't know. I just feel compelled to do it and to talk about my story, which is probably pretty lame, but maybe it can help somebody. Or maybe it's just me talking to the ether. I don't really have a plan or any kind of there's no point, I guess, to it. Just I don't have anything specific in mind other than to talk about my life experiences and what's led me to here. Um, so because I have no plan and there's really no coherent ending that I have in mind, or even a beginning for that matter, um, why not just start at the beginning? Um, I was born in America. Um, I spent most of my young life in churches and church schools. Uh, my grandmother would take me to see Lester Summerall when I was a very small child, um, toddler ages, maybe 2 to 4. Um, I was too young, of course, to sit in the large auditorium with the adults. So I was sent to the daycare center, which I got kicked out of because there was a kid who couldn't pronounce my name properly, and I thought he was doing it on purpose. I couldn't comprehend that he just couldn't pronounce my name properly. I thought he was doing it on purpose to harass me. So I did the same thing to him. His name was Mark. I remember. We were like 3, and I still remember this kid's name. His name was Mark. So I kept, every time he would mispronounce my name, I would mispronounce his intentionally in order to show him what it was like. And he took grave offense to this. And eventually he attacked me out of anger, um, and got into a fight with him. And I can't remember who won. I don't think it's relevant. The result was that I wasn't allowed in with the other children anymore. So I had to sit with my grandmother in the adult auditorium as a 3 or 4 year old child, which I'm sure was fun for her. Uh, but yeah, so she had to try to come up with ways to keep me still and silent and occupied while the rest of the sermon was going on. And that was how much of my early life went. That was before I even entered school. And eventually, once I did enter school, I went to Christian school, um, where I was taught about the Bible. And most of my teaching revolved around that and the stories, and, Jonah and the whale and Noah's Ark and all of those old Bible stories that any kid who's grown up in any kind of Christian teaching environment knows. And that was how the majority of my elementary school studies went. Of course, we learned about other things, social studies, math, science, but it was all based around the core idea of the Bible and being saved, and Jesus being the way to heaven, and if you didn't believe in Jesus, you were going to burn in hell. And that was very emphasized. If you don't have Jesus, you will burn in hell. That was, I remember being a kid, and I didn't really think much of it then. I was just like, okay, well, definitely Jesus. Obviously, why would I choose anything else? Um, but getting older and thinking back on it now, it's a pretty harsh lesson to try to teach a 7 or 8 year old child that, hey, if you don't got this guy, you know, lake of fire for you, buddy. You know, it's uh, it's a difficult thing for a kid because I think as kids, nobody wants to be bad. Nobody wants to be told that they're bad, that they're just inherently wrong, that they're evil. That their very existence is worthy of being thrown into a lake of fire. Um, but that's the way it was. So what's the point? Well, the point is it was normal. It was normal for me. It was normal for all the kids I went to school with. It was normal for other kids who went to school in the same environment that I did. There were a lot of them. Um, there was this, there was a tiny little community of kids who were all raised that way, and it was normal for us. You know, it wasn't like some people who grew up in what's the word I'm looking for? Who grew up in public schools and then went to church on Sunday, maybe once every couple of weeks, once a month, ever, maybe. Maybe they never went to church. Who knows? Maybe they never even heard the word Jesus until they were an adult. I don't even know. I can't even imagine that. Um, but it was normal. Uh, except it wasn't just on Sunday. It was every day. It was, you got math class, you got science class, and then you have Bible class. And on Wednesday, you have can't remember what they called it. It wasn't mass. We weren't Catholic. Um, it was chapel. Basically, you go to the chapel and you listen to the youth pastor preach, or sometimes you listen to the head pastor preach. Sometimes there were guest speakers who would come in and talk to you about drugs. I believe there was one guy named Nick the Greek who was an actual like mobster, and he came in at one point and talked to us about how Jesus changed his life. And I remember his story was pretty compelling because he had an interesting story. He was an Italian mobster, and Jesus changed his life. So that was pretty compelling. It one that sticks in my memory even today. But I probably am not even remembering that right, considering his name is Nick the Greek. But I'm remembering him as an Italian mobster. So, but I was like 10. Um, Played baseball, played sports. I played baseball, basketball, football, soccer when I could stand it. I was never really into soccer. I couldn't tolerate the idea that I couldn't use my hands, or that if I wanted to use my hands, I had to stand in one spot. And I was the only person other than the other goalie who was allowed to use their hands. I grew up, well, my initial sport experiences were basketball, football, where you're all supposed to catch the ball. And then they're like, well, okay, you can't even touch the ball now. You can only use your feet. So I don't like that. Like, that goes against all the reflexes you just programmed me to have. Why would I like that? But anyways, I played sports. So, I had a pretty normal childhood, I would say. Um, had a mom and a dad and brother and sister. And, mom and dad argued. Um, they went to church. Uh, my brother was not much younger than me, so I at least had a minion, you know, uh, a friend. And then my younger sister was born when we were 7, 8, something like that. You know, um, parents got divorced eventually. Um, I was 12, I think, something like that. I can't remember exactly when it was. But yeah, it was probably 12. It was around the time my grandmother passed away, which was, around then, 12. Uh, and things changed quite a bit. You know, my my dad moved away, not far. Me and my brother actually moved with him, um, and my younger sister stayed with my mom. And there were some difficult times, especially for my sister. Um, Probably for my brother too. Uh, I had some friends from school. I was dating this girl whose parents were very concerned about my life, and they wanted to help me. So they would drive me to a lot of school functions. It was also a Christian school. It was a Baptist school. Um, but my brother took a large brunt of punishment from my dad. He was grounded almost all the time, and it was usually for dumb stuff that he just wouldn't do at school. Like he wouldn't tuck his shirt in, or some minor infraction like that he was getting in trouble for at school, and he would get grounded for. So he was almost always grounded in his room. But not that it mattered to me because I was hardly ever there. I was spending most of my time with my girlfriend and her parents, who were fairly wealthy and were taking good care of their children and also of me when I was there. They were very helpful and very accommodating. Um, they really wanted me to succeed along with their children. I felt like I was one of their kids. Honestly, they were very good to me, and I miss them. They were good people. Um, but I don't know. Once once I got to the age of graduation, um, they moved away. Well, her the girl I was dating, her parents moved away uh, in our senior year, and they invited me to come with them. Which, in retrospect, I I wonder how different my life would have turned out if I had taken them up on that. But I just couldn't. It was too much of a leap for me, I guess. Uh, so I stayed, and I was just getting to the point where I was driving, so I had a lot of freedom that I should not have had. I was not mature enough at the time. I mean, hell, I'm probably still not mature enough to have freedom. Honestly, it's such a huge responsibility. Um, but yeah, I partied a lot, drank a lot, um, smoked a lot. Smoking, this has been uh, a huge problem for me in my life. I think I'm trying to remember the first time I remember smoking, and I want to say I was 9. First time I remember cigarettes themselves, like very specifically, was very young. I was probably 4, and I was over at one of my parents' friends' houses, and they were having a card game night, something like that, where they were drinking and smoking cigarettes and doing whatever. I didn't know. I was, like I said, I was 4 or something like that, playing with their daughter. Um, but I remember the kitchen being full of smoke. It was just smoky card game environment, and you walk out and like, get out of here. You go play. Um, but first time I remember physically smoking a cigarette myself, I think I was 9, and I was hanging out with a friend of mine at I don't know if it was uh, an abandoned baseball field, but it definitely was not very well kept up. It was at best a practice field. Um, we were hanging out there. It was ironically also the first time that I saw pornography. He had a porno magazine, and he was like, "Hey, check this out." And I'm like, oh wow, And he said, "Here, let's have a cigarette, and just look at the magazine." So I was like, "This is great." I was 10, 11, something like that. But yeah, so that was the first time I remember smoking one, like physically smoking one myself, and that kind of stuck with me. I had friends who had older siblings who would supply us growing up. Always had to have the supply. Um, Same thing with alcohol. It wasn't alcohol wasn't as bad as far as the hold that it has. I could seem to quit that, other than a couple of points where I was really drinking a lot, like you know every day, waking up, drinking. You know, last thing I remember is drinking and then passing out. Um, but that only happened a couple of times. Whereas with cigarettes, it was always constant. It was always there. That was just like, yep, that's just a given. That's just going to happen. Um, so why am I saying all of that? Well, because that was always there, and it's always been there my whole life. Uh, from the time I was a young teenager to now, even. I'm 44 years old. Uh, it was something that always just kind of stuck that I wasn't able to get rid of. Why is that important? Well, um, I got married eventually. I was early 30s, maybe 31. I don't remember exactly again. Um, Time lost its meaning after a while. I had become kind of a loser, honestly. You know, I still lived with my mother. Um, I worked, but I didn't have my own life. I didn't have my own family. I didn't have my own house. Um, but eventually I did. Eventually I got married and I had a child. And uh, we were able to, after a period of time, save up enough to where we got our own house and, started to have my own life. But throughout all of that, the smoking always stayed there. I quit drinking after my son was born. And it was just, I thought I was sober, not really thinking about this and what it was doing to me. But things fell apart. They didn't work out with my wife. Um, I'm not really sure why. I mean, I know academically why, but and part of the reason is because of what happened after. A few years after she had left, I got into a car accident, and while they were doing scans to see if I had broken bones or anything like that, they found tumors They found a tumor in my brain and a tumor in my lung, which was kind of a shock, of course, to me. I had been going along just thinking, oh yeah, everything's fine. Like I'm just going to work. I was working two jobs, and there was no signs, at least from my perspective, that I thought that I could look back at and say, yeah, I should have recognized this. There's nothing like that. It was Everything just seemed normal. I'd wake up, I'd do my morning routine, I'd drink my coffee, I'd maybe do a couple exercises, and then I'd go work one and maybe two jobs, and then go home. And depending on how late it was, have a couple drinks, um, and eat dinner, wake up, and do everything all again the next day. Um, but yeah, apparently there was something wrong. There was something pretty majorly wrong that I just wasn't aware of. Which I don't know how to process it, because the tumor that was in my brain was in the right frontal lobe, which controls the personality portion of my brain, of a person's brain. Uh, they did surgery to remove that, which was successful. Um, and but it was a slow growing tumor that ended up being 3.7 centimeters, something like that, in diameter. You know, not massive, but not tiny. Um, it caused a swelling in my entire brain, and I don't know how long it was there. That's the that's the thing that really messes with my mind. I think the most is that I don't know how long it was there. You know, especially since it was in an area that affects the personality of a person. It affects your higher brain functions, your higher decision making processes. Um, how much of what I thought was me was actually me? And does that even matter? You know, what difference does it make? It doesn't change anything. It doesn't. I don't want to say excuse it, but it doesn't change anything that happened. Any arguments that my wife and I got into, anytime I was too hard on my son, anytime I was too hard on myself or anybody else, or just mouthing off because, I thought that I was right about something. Does it make a difference? And then why do I still smoke? I don't know. I really don't. I've been able to quit for 3 weeks. Um, I like it. That's the only conclusion I can come to that makes any sense to me whatsoever, is that I enjoy it. I like it. It makes me happy. I mean, I don't look happy, but I never look happy. So I can't really use that, I guess, as an accurate gauge. Um, Obviously, I'm addicted to it. Drinking, yeah, I can take it or leave it most of the time. Um, Very rarely will I have more than 3 drinks. This is not all liquor, by the way. I have to thin it out. If I drank 3 of these in a night, I'd be smashed and just have to crash out. My body is pretty small compared to what it used to be. I lost a lot of weight when I got diagnosed with cancer. The tumor in my lung is cancer. Uh, Tumor in my head was actually a meningioma that they initially assumed was part of the small cell lung cancer, which I have, but it wasn't, which is pretty amazing. But obviously, it's still a pretty bleak diagnosis with having small cell lung cancer. But yeah, that's where my life is at. So why am I making a video about it? Why am I thinking about posting it for people to judge me and listen to my life story and say, oh, what's this guy's problem? Sounds like he had a great childhood. Not that I'm blaming my childhood, because I'm not. So what could I have done differently? What could I have done? I don't know. I mean, I have ideas, obviously. Well, if you never smoked, life would have been a lot different. Yeah, probably. If you never drank, yeah, life probably would have been a lot different. Sure.